Emily.
Oh, hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Through Their Eyes. Today, we will be talking about overconsumption and fast fashion. And we also have a new co host with us today. Amvi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Unvi. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I'm the new co-host on the show. So I'm so looking forward to making awesome videos and discussing with Emily on different topics. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of ideas lined up, which I'm very excited for. Amvi and I have talked about it definitely like a handful of times. But today we'll kick off today's episode by talking about, well, what should we talk about first? Overconsumption, or should we talk about fast fashion first?
Oh my
What do you
gosh! Wow. We could definitely talk about overconsumption. So let's get into that because it's like the overview.
Okay.
So you want to start it off, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, I think what prompted me, at least, to be interested in this topic and overconsumption, like wanting to talk about it on the podcast, is just the fact that I've seen so many TikToks about it. And I think I mentioned this to Unvi a while ago, but there's this whole TikTok trend a couple weeks ago where it was like overconsumption core, and it was just or like underconsumption core, and like in the overconsumption core videos are mostly like focused on like people showing just the mass amount of items that they buy from like micro trends or things that have been trending for a while or things that have had like kind of a revival in pop culture, but it's ultimately just kind of buying whatever it is popular in the market during that like time. And I think specifically like recently, especially with like the rise of like fast fashion companies like Shein and Runway, like you definitely see a lot more trends than we saw like back in the 90s or the 80s, because I think when you think about like the 80s, you have kind of a certain picture in mind of what was like in fashion. And like when you think of like the 90s, you have a specific like idea of what was like trending. Like with like the 80s, you think of like neon colors and like you think about like perms. And when you think about like the 90s, you think about like relaxed jeans and like what is it? Just like colorful, and like I think about Lisa Frank when I think about the 90s. And then like when you think about the early 2000s, like Y2K, um, I always think about like hot pink and like low rise jeans. Like these decades are characterized by specific things and fashion trends that were kind of a constant throughout that decade. But I feel like with the 2010s, there's just so much variety, and because of fast fashion, like I can't really think of one specific thing that's been trending for like the whole decade. And it's like we're in like 2024. Because I feel like we like at first it was like high-waisted like jeans, and now it's like low rise or it's like baggy jeans. So it's like we're like kind of hopping around so much, but there's really no set definitive, and I think it's kind of detrimental to the fashion industry, just because fashion companies like feel the need to like pump out so many new like items literally every day just to kind of compete and to kind of like stay alive in the market. And I think companies like Romway and like Sheen make it so hard for like other like companies that have been constant, like Levi's or like Gap, to kind of compete. Like things that like companies that we've kind of seen for like decades that have kind of maintained their popularity. I feel like they're kind of struggling to keep up with like Sheen and Romway and stuff like that, especially because Anvi sent me this video yesterday, and it talked about Shein and just fast fashion in general. And one of the things that like stuck out to me was that Shein legitimately pumps out 10,000 new items every day, whereas like a company like Zara only pumps out 10,000 a week, which only is kind of like a crazy thing to say, I feel, just because 10,000 is a lot. But when you think about that in comparison to Shein, who's pumping out 10,000 new items a day, it's absolutely ridiculous, just because most of those items end up in a landfill. And then you'll also see people who kind of like feed into overconsumption doing like these 2,000, like $1,000 Sheen hauls. And it's so much. And most of that ends up in a landfill, especially with like the whole micro trend problem that we have, where like something's trending literally one week and then we kind of dispose of it the next week because it's like out of style. Like we kind of go through clothes like faster than like can't even think of an adequate comparison, because I'm like, what else do we shed that quickly? You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of like unprecedented in a way. It's actually, yeah, I can't think of even like a good analogy for it. But yeah, I think ultimately like what I'm trying to get at is just that it's a problem that's just unprecedented and something that we've never seen before, just because like it's so detrimental to what is it, the environment, and then it's also one of those things where it's like our clothes, they're not built to last anymore. Because like Shein pops out like 10,000 new items a day. Like I think in the same video that Ummi sent me, they mentioned how like the clothes are treated as if like they're garbage. Like the garments aren't like created delicately or they're made with materials that like are mostly composed of like microplastics, which is also terrible for your body. Um, but yeah, it's just ultimately a very, like, difficult issue that I think, like, needs to be tackled, but I think it's just so normalized to us because it's our reality, especially for me and Unvi's generation, that we don't really give it too much of a second thought, or when we do and you really kinda step back and, like, think about, like look at it from, like, the vantage point of, like, a third person perspective, it's like, "Wow, like, this is actually terrible." But, like, I mean, feel free to, like, cut in because I've definitely been, like, on a roll with this one
No,
talking, but
you're literally fine. You're, like, really passionate about it, which is amazing. No, but to go on what Emily said, this is definitely a huge problem, and I think one of the biggest reasons why it's such a huge problem is because of, like, the rise of the internet. You know, before all we had was the magazines and whatnot, and it's like, "Oh my gosh, what was Emily wearing on that day?" You know? It's like, okay, you're just kind of chilling with the society that you have and the social groups that you have. But now that the internet is, like, pumping out all of these different trends because different people are finding different things to be on trend. Like, you know, all of these people are just like, oh my gosh, I want to wear that. I want to wear that. I want to wear that. And so it's like through TikTok and Instagram and like all of these things, we're getting all of this crazy. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to say it, but it's like all of these different trends that are just like, wow, why are we having so many?
no,
And
I think so oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you're fine. But I was just literally gonna say that it's such a problem, that like to keep up with the overconsumption, as you were saying, like with 10,000, you know, per day. Zara actually doesn't do 10,000 per week. They do 10,000 per year. So
My
Shein
god.
Shein is
Oh,
literally pumping out 10,000 per day, and it's not 10,000 like clothing, it's 10,000 styles of clothing. Zara is doing 10,000 styles of clothing per year, which is like comparatively, that's still horrible, but at the same time, comparing it, it's like, "Wow, Shein, you're
yeah,
not okay."
and Zara used to be considered, like, I think no, I don't know whether Zara was considered fast fashion, but, like, it wasn't with, like it wasn't kind of, like, on the same it wasn't on par with, like, Levi or Gap where they, like, come out with items and then they stay in your wardrobe for, like, ever. Because I think I watched another video on it a long time ago, and it was talking about how was it with, like, Levi and Gap, like oh, it was, like, this one statistic where it was comparing how, like, how much clothes we buy, like, today in a year versus how much, like, clothing items people bought, in a year, like, a few decades ago, and I forgot what decade it was. I think it was maybe like 20, 30 years ago, but it was saying that people only bought between 5 to like 10 new items like a year. And
Oh
then
my
now yeah, because back then items were built to last because we're not trying to pump out items to keep up with trends. It's more so we're coming out with clothing that's meant to last and yeah, it's literally just meant to last. But now I think people buy between 20 to, like, 30, like, new items, so it's, like, that number is legitimately, like, doubled or tripled since probably, like, 20, 30 years ago, which is really crazy when you think about it, because it's, like and that's just an average. That doesn't account for because I feel like there's such, like, a class divide where we have people who legitimately cannot afford to buy more clothing, and then we have people who are literally doing $2,000 Shein hauls, so that's just averaging it out. That's not kind of, like it's not really like person A and B are buying 30 new items of clothing every day. That's just like the dead set middle. You know what I'm saying? It's literally
yeah.
just mean. So it's like it definitely I feel like it definitely varies from person to person, but I don't really think it's an accurate mean. Like when you really look at it from like a statistical standpoint, I think it's literally just that like there's such a deep class divide that we have people who are buying a ton of new items every year, and then we have people who legitimately cannot afford to do that. Like who can literally not even afford to like buy like a shirt. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, especially to add on to that, there's a lot of kids in my high school, and actually, like, today, one of my friends, she was basically saying, "Oh my god, I need a Shein subscription so bad," and I'm just like, "Okay,
That
why? You're
subscription?
rich." Like, I think it's like a membership subscription. I don't even know what she's talking
Um,
about, but like she's rich. She has money and she's still like, "Well, I want a Shein whatever." And I'm just like, "You don't need it though." And I found that so funny because it's like the day I want to, you know, talk about this with you, Emily, about like Shein, she's just like, "Oh yeah." I want some more Shein. But it's just, like, crazy because it's, like, you see a lot of different people, being like, "Oh my god, this is so cute, that's so cute." But now it's like everyone's popularizing it. Before it used to be very stigmatized, especially when we were really into, like, the whole, "Oh my god, fast fashion sucks." But now I don't know what the shift is. I don't like, we haven't really been changing much, but it's like, okay, people are now kind of accepting fast fashion, or at least in my generation. And I know there's, like, definitely some people who can't afford to buy better clothing and whatnot. And
Yeah.
that Shein's the only thing they have. Like if you're a college student on a struggle bus, you're kind of gonna like rely more on them. Especially if like for formal events and whatnot and things you really just can't afford, like a 50, 60, $70 dress. But then at the same time, these are people who are really well off and can afford good clothes, but they just, don't want to.
Yeah.
Um, and
I think
it
oh,
gives
sorry, go
me
ahead.
no, you're fine. I was just saying it gives me kind of like the ick, and I'm just like, "Yo, why are you doing that?" But
Yeah.
continue.
No, I was gonna say, I feel like the normalization definitely comes from people being superficial in the sense that they want to keep up with micro trends. So they're willing to do that, what is it, at the stake of, what is it, people who are getting severely underpaid at these factories or also at the expense of the environment. I think it's just kind of like people not really understanding the gravity of the situation and willing to kind of like overlook it just so they can like stay stylish and like wear their little like Brazil top. Have you seen remember when it was really popular? Like that
No,
Brazil.
I do. Oh my gosh, those looked so interesting. Oh my gosh.
And it
I was
was
like,
popular for like 2 weeks, and then I don't see anybody wear it anymore. But I remember there was a point where I saw everybody wear it for like 2 weeks on TikTok, and now it's like I never see it. I legitimately never see that shirt, and that's what I'm talking
right?
about. Like, the life cycle of a trend now, I swear it only lasts maybe like a week, whereas it used to last legitimate decade, like a legitimately a decade. Like, because when I think about like the 80s or the 90s or the 70s or the 50s, I have a very specific like what is it? I have very specific like style or clothing items in mind. Do you know what I'm saying? But it's like
Yeah,
I can't think of any specific, what is it, items or like styles that have kind of like lived throughout like the 2010s for like a decent amount of time. Like we've had like different styles like revamped. Like we've seen definitely like a surge, a resurgence in like Y2K and like
yeah,
90s, but it's not anything super specific. And I remember like I saw like a TikTok about that where this one girl, she was saying she was like, there's really nothing specific that's trending anymore because no matter what you're into, there's gonna be a corner of TikTok where there are other people who like the same things that you do. And I was like, that is really true. Because if
yeah,
you're kind of like into Y2K, like there's a whole like side of TikTok that's into that. Or if you're like into the 90s, there's a whole side of TikTok into that. Like, if you're into, like, more so, like, a goth style, like, there's the side of TikTok that's, like, into that, you know what I'm saying? It's like, no
yeah.
matter what you're into, like, as niche as it is, there's always gonna be a community of it on TikTok. So it's like, I can't think of anything specific, which isn't, like, inherently wrong, but I think my only contempt with it is just, like, how it relates to fast
Overconsumption.
fashion and
Yeah.
overconsumption. Yeah.
I definitely think that, like, there are some trends that I've just seen, like, come on and off. Like, right now, we see, like, the whole Stanley complex and everyone's just, like, hoarding up Stanleys, and it's also, like, the athleisure thing, especially with Lululemon. I was like,
Mhm.
nothing against Lululemon, whatever, but at the same time, it's like, now the quality is getting so much worse, and it's, like, expensive too. It's, like, expensive athleisure, but people are, like, using it for the trend, and then I've actually seen like, I was scrolling on Shein for this video, and I was like, "Okay, what's on here?" There's dupes for Uggs, there's dupes for Stanleys, there's dupes for Lulus, there's like dupes for everything. And it's just like, wow, people are so desperate to hop on the trend trade that they're just like, overconsumption, I don't really care. But as you were saying about like, the people who are just like, laboring like day in, day out, they are actually under some fire right now because what's happening is the Chinese government allegedly is taking refugees from other countries and forcing them to like pick cotton or whatever to feed into like their industries. But at the same time, they're also using these refugees to go into these factories for literally no pay. There's no pay whatsoever. So they're enslaved people working, and there's like blood on all of your hands the moment you buy Shein. And I'm not gonna act like I'm a saint. I bought Shein too. I regret it deeply, but it's happened before. And it's just like, wow, I have blood on my hands because it's like, who made that? Probably
Yeah.
a refugee or probably someone who's severely underpaid, working way too many hours for it to be even considered healthy. So
No,
makes
yeah,
sense.
I agree, and it's really sad just because it's like I feel like generally, like as much responsibility as like we have as civilians, I feel like ultimately a good bulk of it falls under kind of like whatever jurisdiction that they're under. And it's so sad to see that like Chinese labor laws are just so kind of like not what's the word I'm looking for? Like the phrase I'm looking for, like
Strict?
not strict. They're not strict at all. They
That's
should
what
be.
I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they should be strict because it's like
They're
they're
very, like, elusive because it's like they want cheap labor to feed their economy. Because China's economy, I'm into politics and whatnot, but Chinese economy is very, very heavily built up on exportation. It's like right
yeah.
now at AP Year, we're learning about, like, mercantilism, and it's basically the exports that the country has are like you basically it's like maximize exports, minimize imports. So what China is kind of trying to do right now is maximize the amount of exports that they can have so that they can feed their economy more and then build better systems inside their country to make sure that they aren't like importing a lot of things. That's kind of backfiring on them right now because like
Yeah,
the
it
whole
is.
thing they're going through. But like that's why we see so many things like in America at least, and we're just like, wow, that's made in China. That's made in China. Everything's made in China. Oh my gosh, but it's
Yeah.
just like the labor laws are so elusive. They're just like, "Oh, well, you can still work 'cause under this clause." It's like,
Yeah, that and they're just entirely too laid back and they don't prioritize the person, which is like really sad to see. And it's like, I'm like relating this back like mentally to like what I'm learning in my industrial organizational psychology class, which is basically like that's, like, such, like, a mouthful, but essentially it's kind of psychology of the workplace, and, what we're learning about is how kind of, like, in order to, like, increase, like, motivation, like, for a person's, like, work, they have to actually have, like, a good work-life balance, which sounds, like, trite when you, like, kind of say it out loud because it's like, of course you need breaks from work because how else are you gonna get motivation? How else are you gonna recharge? But in the video that, like, you sent me last night, it's funny because, they were literally talking about how a lot of people who work in, like, these fast fashion, like, factories, they get 1 day a month to themselves. They get 1 day a month where they don't work, which is so sad because it's like these individuals, they have nobody standing up for them. And
yeah.
it's not as simple as going to work somewhere else. It's not that simple just because a lot of times these people are deeply impoverished, or it's like if they go work somewhere else, it's gonna be the exact same situation, just a different setting. So yeah, and it's, like, sad to see people getting taken advantage like that just because they're kind of backed up into a corner because it's either, well, like, make $10 a week or no money at all, and it's like they need that money to eat, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, it's really sad, and I don't know, it's just like, at the end of the day, it's like as much responsibility as, like, a civilian has, like, the the responsibility just mostly falls on these organizations who are kind of, like, was doing a disservice to, like, these people. And I feel like as much as, like I don't know, it's, like, difficult because I feel like there is, like, a tension surrounding how bad Sheen is. Like, there's, like I mean, like, there's thousands not thousands, but there's so many video essays on it. There's so many stats on it. There's so much news covering it. And it's sad because it's, like, people will still buy from it at the end of the day, unfortunately, but it's, like, I'm just like, these companies ultimately need to do better, but it's sad because at the end of the day, it's like it will always be more so about like the monetary means as opposed to kind of like, what is it? Like the care and respect for their workers who are literally doing their labor for them. Like these people are, whether they recognize it or not, these people are the backbone of their companies because it's like if they're not doing that labor, nobody else is going to do it. Like the freaking like CEO of Sheen is not going to come down there to like these factories and build a freaking Brazil top from like a of a Brazil top. Like he's not going to do that. No, he's going to pay somebody literally like a pennies a day to do it for them, so you'd think they'd have a little bit more respect for them or pay them at least a livable wage, but they don't, and it's sad. And
Yeah.
it's just one of those things where it's like, it makes you wonder like what you can do, but it's sad because like a lot of these companies, they have so much power that these people almost feel like untouchable to us, which is
Yeah,
like sad.
100%. Yeah. I know especially, like, when I go to India, like, and then other places around India, like Sri Lanka and whatnot, uh, my family, we actually come from, like, a family of weavers. So we are very in, like, the clothing industry. Both of sides of my family are actually, like, in the clothing industry. And I was like, I've seen firsthand, like, how tolling it is. Like, my father actually, they were in very deep poverty, and like the only way that we could really get out of it is just picking up like a trade skill and then picking up the trade skill to like survive. So that cycle of in poverty was only broken by my grandfather building up his own shop and being like an entrepreneur. So like, go grandpa. But it's like there's so many people on the streets of these like impoverished countries, or at least these countries who aren't fully developed yet. And they're just like needing jobs. They're needing something to make them like, keep going. And it's like this frugal means of survival. Cause it's like the company needs something and so do you. And it's like you're both kind of putting something in it. Like, you need to feed your family. You need to do something to at least make sure that the next generation has something else to, rely on. But so it's like this parasitic relationship on each other. Because actually, no, parasitic relationship on one side, but like they need someone to feed them, and this is the hand that feeds, and they can't really bite the hand that feeds now, can they? Or else they won't be fed, and then they die. So, I think a lot of the mentality I think it's also a mentality thing that's really keeping them there, because coming from, an Asian background, and then, like, also a lot of people I know coming from Asian backgrounds, it's the mentality of sacrifice everything you have right now to make sure that the next generation or the next people, like, in front of you at least have something to work on. And that's just like that mindset that will never, leave. And it's like a lot of ironically, a lot of my friends who are, like contemplated buying Sheen and whatnot are Asian. So like they have that mentality, and they've actually a lot of them have come from impoverished backgrounds as well. Not them being impoverished, but their family. And they're still like, oh well, it's okay. Sheen's whatever. Child labor, it's whatever. And I'm just like, dude, how is this working out for you? Do you
Yeah.
have no conscience? But then again, it's like cheap clothing. And that mental thing is like cheap clothing. Well, we can just be ignorant and put that aside to just get, something to work with, something that we can be happy about.
I have, like, 2, like, comments, and I'm like, "Wait," like, I'm, like, trying to, like, keep in mind what I was, like, gonna say, but I was gonna respond to the mentality thing first that you said, and I feel like a lot of those companies, they kind of feed off of that. Like, they know how, like, these, like, people are thinking, like, how these workers think, and they know that they're looking to provide for their offspring and their family just because I feel like Eastern, like, culture specifically are very family oriented, so it's ultimately just about kind of, like, the good of the group. So it's like, "Okay, if I need to make the sacrifice, then it's like, then, like, so be it." Correct me if I'm wrong. But
No,
it's
you're
like
fine. That's what
yeah,
that's from what
but
I've seen, that's what it is, yeah.
yeah, so I feel like those, like, major companies, they just kind of feed off of that, and it's so sad because they legitimately exploit them. Like, it's exploitative labor at the end of the day. And then as for, like, your friends who, like, actually have family who come from, like, those, like, backgrounds where, like, they've either experienced that or, like, witnessed it themselves, it's kind of one of those things where I feel like people have either become super desensitized to pain or in suffering, or they just haven't seen it firsthand, so for them, it hasn't really set in that it's real. You know what I'm saying? Where it's
Yeah.
that object permanence thing where it's like they hear about it, but they're not seeing it, so to them, it's kind of like it doesn't even exist in a way. But, yeah, I feel like with the desensitization part, Jesus, I cannot English.
It's okay.
What is it? But with, like, people being desensitized, I feel like it's honestly largely the fault of the internet. I think people are so used to kind of seeing negative news all the time, especially, like, our generation, just because 'cause we're kind of literally the first generation who's grown up with the internet when you really think about it, or at least, like, the way that it is right now. Um,
Yeah.
what is it? Yeah, it's like we've just become desensitized because we're so used to being exposed to so much media and so much of it being overwhelmingly negative that, in a way, we've developed tolerance for it. And then with, the object permanence thing, I feel it's kind of like an amalgamation of those 2 factors. It's either that, like, it's that we've both been desensitized. Oh my gosh, desensitized, I'm so sorry. And
You're
then
fine. Don't worry about it. Words are hard, man. Words are hard.
it's both that and then also the fact that, what is it? Yeah, just the fact that it's not real because it's, like, kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing. We don't see it, so for us, it doesn't feel as real, like, it's not as if we're tangibly experiencing it, like, through a first person perspective, and I think both those factors really contribute to people being able to overlook, what is it? The gravity of the situation.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of these people, like, like I've never toiled. I've never experienced poverty the same way my father and his father and whatnot have. I've grown up quite well, actually, thanks to the sacrifices of said people. And it's like that has 100% desensitized me, because it's like I've grown up in a very different environment from people who are experiencing that. And it's like me coming in with my white savior complex. I don't know why I called it that, but you know what I mean. And it's like, hey, I know what I'm doing. I know everything's going on. Like, I have that going on with me. And it's just like looking at all these people, and it's like, wow, I feel so guilty. I feel so sad. "Do you want some money? Here, have some money. That'll fix all your problems." And it's like, that's not helping. That's really not helping. And it's just like that conscience, it's like the mindset of what exactly can you do? It's like, okay, well, you can't really save them. If I don't buy stuff, then someone else is gonna buy stuff. And it's just like, why do I have to stop? And I think that's one of the most interesting things I've learned, as, like, a young kid. It's like one of these people, I don't know descriptive words, I'm sorry, but basically a family friend of mine, she was saying how she, like, paused doing a bunch of different things. She started eating organic from farmers markets. She tried, like, doing all these things to become more sustainable, to become more healthy, to become more, just in tune with everything and to like stop all of the suffering in the world because she was like carrying all of that on her shoulders to have like that savior complex. But then it backfired on her because she couldn't do all of those things. So her brain actually went to her being like, if I'm doing this stuff, but other people aren't. Other people are still doing terrible things and that's still contributing. One person isn't going to make an immediate difference. So, like, why am I even trying? I think that's just like a mindset that a lot of people go through. It's like they have the savior complex and they're just like, oh my gosh, I want to save everyone. But at the same time, you also have the complex of, but I can't really save them, no, can I? And it's like the double headed coin. You want to be a savior, but at the same time, you're also want your own interests and your own
No.
self.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like a lot of people get really discouraged. Like they'll kind of take the initiative to make those efforts to be more like eco-friendly or sustainable. And then they'll see the next person literally doing triple the damage that they would have done. And then for them, it's so discouraging because it almost feels like everything that they're doing isn't even making an impact or at least like a real dent, which is really, I feel like that's such like a difficult like, what's the word? What's the phrase I'm looking at? I just feel like it's such a difficult, like, situation to deal with, and I feel like, yeah, I agree. I see so many people kind of, like, struggling with that, and I wanna say that it comes down to resilience, but I feel like it's not just that. It ultimately, like, because when you're in that situation where you're taking those initiatives and then you're extremely discouraged by, like, how the culture is, it's really hard for you to continue on that path to, like, what is it? To maintain, like, the good habits that you're building. Just
Yeah.
like yeah, and especially with, like, our culture right now where, like, overconsumption is almost the norm. I wouldn't say almost the norm because, of course, like, not everybody can afford to indulge in overconsumption. But I think, where was I going with this?
It's definitely something that, we are getting more used to, which is 100%, an issue.
No, I agree. I think it's something that we're kind of getting used to, like, seeing. Like, even if, like, an individual like, let's say, like, even if, like, I can't, like, afford to literally buy every single, like, micro trend or, like, every single item that's, like, a micro trend, it's like seeing it on, like, social media all the time normalizes it. Like, it makes you think that that's kind of, like, the norm of, like, how consumerism should be, when it's not at all. But, what else was I gonna say? I feel like there was, like, something else I wanted to segue into as well. Oh, I think I definitely wanted to, like, kind of cover is it the messages and the Shein tags? I thought that was
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
no. Yeah, that she opened her suit and then it was like, "You're gonna die wearing this suit."
Yeah,
Those
and
messages, oh my gosh.
yeah, we were in the video that let me get some context for the viewers in the video. Can you imagine we just, like, start talking about it
Oh
and
my
nobody
gosh, they'd be so
isn't
confused.
in. But, essentially, like, in the video that Envy sent me, there were it was, like, this one, it was, like, this one specific, like, topic about Shein that they were covering, and it was talking about how, like, because the workers are legitimately suffering, sometimes they'll place messages in the clothing, whether it's, like, in the tags or they'll write notes and then, like, legitimately put it in the clothing items. And one of them was like, "Oh, you're going to die in this suit." And I think the way that the what is it? Like, person who was, like, talking over the video, the narrator, the way the narrator was kind of, like, explaining it was more so that, like, the materials in, like, Shein clothing or that are, like, that Shein clothing is, like, composed of aren't good for your body or, like, for the environment because 'cause they're composed of, like, microplastics. And, this wasn't covered in the video, but I heard about this separately, that, like, Shein clothing, like, they found, like, traces of lead in it, which is
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
really crazy, and then, like I mean, that message was super cryptic, but it makes you wonder, like, what do you mean by that? Like, what
Yeah,
do you mean
what do you mean I'm gonna die in this suit? And the
yeah,
thing
what do
with
you
the
mean I'm
lead
gonna die in
yeah,
this
yeah,
suit?
yeah. But the
And
thing
then
with the lead is oh, I'm sorry, Emily, keep going.
oh, I was just gonna say what was I gonna say? Oh, I was just gonna say, like, it makes you, like, wonder, like, what is it that they know? And they try to cover it up by being like, "Oh, well, all those phrases are misprints." Well, it's like, why are they all, like, related to the same topic? Like, a misprint would be like orange giraffe tall, like something like that, like, I you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's what I'm
But that's
picturing.
like a
Go ahead.
direct message, like, you
Yeah,
know someone's about to die in that suit,
yeah.
because that's,
But
like, a billion different ones. But the thing is, there's actually, like, a thing going on, like, or, like, the study and whatnot, that they did about Shein clothing. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but allegedly, Shein clothing is actually accumulating more and more lead in their clothing than they previously did, and it's because of China, experiencing some economic hardships at the moment. So some background for China, they are not good with a lot of the different things they're doing. So, like for example, their like ground is crumbling in, their buildings are crumbling down. They're having food propaganda to actually hide the fact that they don't have clean food. It's a whole thing. They're struggling on this struggle bus immediately. So because of that, they are actually finding cheaper and cheaper ways to manufacture clothing to make sure that it's like, it's cheaper and it still looks pretty enough to sell. So it just happens to have a lot of lead in it. And I feel like that's where that savior complex comes back into the play. And then for the white savior thing, I had an AP Euro and we were talking about that, so I apologize for using that term. But the savior complex comes in because a lot of these people come to China and they're just like, oh my, like the influencers. Oh my gosh, the influencers came and they're like, oh yeah, everything's totally fine here. I remember one of these influencers, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go to China and I'm gonna fix everything. And she literally said that. I don't remember who it was, but she was just like, yeah, I'm gonna go and fix the problems occurring and
that's,
whatnot
like,
with my
so,
video.
like, tone deaf. But go ahead. Yeah, like, saying that's, like, so tone deaf. But sorry, go ahead. I just wanted
No,
to say
yeah, you're fine. I was actually just gonna end it there, but it's just like that savior complex keeps coming back into it. And it's just like, and the thing is, it's actually destroying more and more and more of their of like the natives who are creating this clothing. So it's actually happening. And this is what I'm relating it to AP Euro because I just like that's where I came from. I'm sorry guys. But basically what's happening is when the native people in like colonialism and whatnot, when they did something wrong, they would be like severely punished by the Europeans. So they try to like fight back or revolt. There's like, for example, we take the South Americans, right? They try to fight back and whatnot against the conquistadors. They were brutally massacred and brutally killed. And a lot of things that's going on in media and whatnot, and how it's becoming more and more publicized. A lot of like it's like top down reform coming from like the head of Sheen because it's like okay now our workers are like getting exposed and now it's like oh my god we can't have it for our company, we can't have that bad marketing. So what they're doing is they're shutting down more and more of like their workers voices and adding stricter policies to make sure that it's not outspoken, and at the same time they're also just putting in more and more into the overconsumption market to like be like this didn't happen, this doesn't exist, if that
yeah.
makes sense.
No, and that's so sad too when you really think about it, because it's like the fact that they go to such great lengths to hide it, and it's just like I don't know, when you really think about how unethical it is, like the way that I'm like relating it to something sort of different in my head, but like I'm thinking about like this one phrase I heard a long time ago where it was like, um, dang, I can't remember what it said verbatim, but it was something to the tone of there's no such thing as like an ethical billionaire, or there's no such thing. Yeah, like something to that tone where it's like when you think about, like, what it takes to amass that much money, like, there has to be some sort of unethical labor in, like, what is it, in the loop of, like, you getting to such a high position or to amassing so much money. Because, when I think about, like, um I'm trying to like relate it back to like a specific scenario that I have in mind, but I feel like Sheen ultimately is kind of like a perfect example. I'm not sure if their like CEO specifically is a billionaire, but like ultimately we all know that he has a lot of money, like definitely more money than you can conceptualize. And to get to a position like that in life, I feel it definitely takes like some sort of unethical practices when you think about it because it's like when you actually kind of put it into perspective, I don't think anybody would have that much money if you were actually paying all of your workers a fair wage or actually treating them with like dignity. Because when you
Yeah.
really think about like how like because I'm like the way that I'm thinking about it is like how hypothetically like you would allocate funds. Like if you were paying everybody like a living wage, like giving them like dental or like, like stuff like that, it's like that takes money that would be allocated to those employees or to a specific purpose. But what a lot of them do is like they don't allocate money in that way because they want to amass more money for themselves. And I feel like that's the only way you can really get that rich is by kind of taking somebody else's share and like keeping it for yourself. And I feel like that's ultimately what it is. in my mind, I see it as, like, theft because you're denying somebody a living wage while they're literally working for you working on you hand and foot, um yeah, like, I just can't really think of it in any other way other than, like, theft because it's like, these people get a break once a month, and you pay them less than $20 a week? Like, are you kidding me? Like, I know I said that
It's
already so
insane.
many times, but it
No,
really
but, like, you're
hits
just
me.
really hammering in the point, and that's a really important one because it's like, "Oh my god, they're making no money." And again, I'm gonna bring up AP Euro because I'm sorry, it's just my class, but, like, we're learning currently about the Reformation, and basically there are 2 popes, and then there's, like, I don't even know. There's like the 2, there's one in France, there's one in Italy. Okay, and the thing is the church is very, very, looked down upon at this moment in time, because they're very immoral. They're committing multiple different sins. It's extremely corrupt with like nepotism and like, oh my gosh, it's like all of these things, like people are buying offices, people are like doing a bunch of corrupt things, and no one's helping the peasants. No one's helping the people who actually want to get salvation and whatnot. It is literally just I have power. I want to get all of that power. And that's kind of just what I'm, associating that with because it's like a historical thing. It's a historical thing of, oh my gosh, like all of these things, like, these manipulative tactics, they're all historical, as my great AP Euro examples have showed us. But it's a very historical thing. And it's just like something we aren't learning from in history. It's like history repeats itself. So we should learn from it. But we aren't learning from it. We're just letting it happen because it just how corrupt human nature and the world is. And it's like, going from Thomas Hobbes, some people hate him, some people like him. I don't really have many opinions on him, but he says that humans are naturally selfish, brutish, and cruel because we have animalistic nature, and that animalistic nature really drives us in the beginning because it's like the need to survive. That's the needs of of survival. And so it's like a lot of these people they'll be trying to get power and amass power because it's like the animalistic urge of I'm better than all of you, I need to survive, I need to be that person. So it's just like human nature and then the tolerance of said human nature, but like the animalistic aspect of human nature is truly just I don't even know, it's kind of I have no words, I have no words.
I feel like that definitely delves into, like, the why of why this happens, and I feel like I definitely agree to, like, a certain extent. I don't know, when I think about what drives people to act in a way that exploits other people, I feel like I've talked about this with my friends so many times, which is actually really interesting. Cause yeah, I think I have, like, one friend who says that where he kind of, like, stands by that, where he feels like a lot of people are, like, intrinsically have, like, a negative or selfish motive, and that's what drives them to act in the way that they do. But for me, I mean, at least me personally, I feel like people are inherently neutral. Like, I forgot who it was, but, like, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, like, tabula rasa, where it's like people are blank slates, and that relates more so to, like, um, nature versus nurture. But the way that I think of it is more so that, like, in life you're kind of just blank, like you're born as like a blank slate, and then as you grow up you can either choose to be good or to be bad. I feel like, at least in my through my vantage point, I feel like labeling human beings as either like intrinsically good or bad like has kind of like the strong con of like people feel like, oh well, like if I'm intrinsically bad, like I'm just like going back to my nature, like I'm just
I'm just
falling
gonna act
for
horrible. Yeah.
I'm gonna act accordingly and be like, well, this is who I am, like I'm just gonna go with my nature. Where it's like, no, like you don't have to be bad. Like, especially as an adult, like you have that conscious, like you can make that conscious effort to be responsible and act in a way that is both like ethical and moral. Like you don't have to default to any sort of negative or selfish behaviors. And I feel like, I don't know, and I feel like I try to kind of look at it through the vantage point of like these people in these positions who will do unethical things in order to kind of amass more money or to like benefit themselves, not to empathize with them, but to more so just gain a deeper understanding of why are you doing
100%.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, I feel like it is them kind of not defaulting to like selfish nature, but just indulging selfishness and selfishness. And I'm just like, I don't know, I can't really like, I'm trying to think of anything else that kind of relates to this topic as well. That I'm like, because I feel like I kind of like do think about this a lot, and I'm just trying to think of something else that I'm not like coming up with right now that I feel like relates or that I've definitely thought about. But yeah, that's at least my take on it. I feel like people have that choice to either be good or bad. But I feel like once people kind of get to those positions as well, I feel like they kind of get into this headspace of well, this is my normal. This is normalcy to me. And I feel like to them, like, it doesn't even feel bad anymore. Oh, I'm not sure if it like if there's ever a point for them where it ever did feel bad, but like I think yeah, I feel like they kind of get to like a headspace where like it's like their normalcy and for them it's just kind of like routine to like be that way. Like wake up, like not
Yeah.
pay my employees, like that type of mentality.
That's just
Like
my norm, guys. That's just what I
yeah.
do.
And I always wonder, I'm like, are they aware that it's like I mean, I'm sure they have to be that they have to be aware that it's wrong because I feel like when people do bad things, like they know it's wrong, but it's more so that they choose to do it because they feel like it benefits them. So I feel like that's kind of the underlying motive with why these like billionaires or like these CEOs do what they do. But I don't know, what's your take on it?
Okay, I definitely think like I agree with a bunch of your statements. It really is like, the environment that ultimately, I mean, like, yeah, some things are genetic. Like, for example, okay, like this person acts this specific way. It's like, okay, that's a little bit genetic. But for the most part, it's really your environment that decides who you're gonna be, what type of person you're gonna be. And it's just like I think what's happening, or at least my experience with Asian countries, I can't really say because it's like I'm not Asian the same way they're Asian, but I think my experience with those specific countries is that it's more of like a I want to win at any cost. I need to survive at any cost. It's very competitive over there. I believe that China actually has one of the hardest, if not the hardest, college entrance exams, and students will like kill themselves over trying to get in. And it's also Korea too. So a lot of Koreans actually try to get into like these big companies like Samsung and whatnot, and it's just like they'll fight tooth and nail. And actually, a few of them, like and then yo, oh my gosh, Japan. I don't even get started in Japan. Most like
Oh,
the most suicidal. Hmm?
I was just gonna say that Japan's like work culture I've heard is very
It's
toxic.
horrible. They're actually one of the most suicidal, countries on the globe other than Greenland, and it's just like, "Oh my god." So the work culture in Asia is terrible beyond belief, and it's like everyone's competitive. Everyone wants to earn more, get more, be more, have that, like, animalistic thing, and I think that's the environment that they're really being raised in, and so it's like, it doesn't matter how you're gonna and they're also before I say anything else, they're also desensitized to poverty. They're desensitized to a bunch of these things because these are things that are happening. Now, I can't speak for every Asian country, but for the ones I've personally been in, there's poverty on the streets. There's kids begging for food. There are people who cannot sustain themselves, and that's normal. That is a norm. They're very different morally than we are because we, at least in America, are a developed nation. We can have that quote unquote savior complex because that's what our norm is. But for them, looking down on people and just being like, well, not looking down, but more of like, okay, you're doing your own thing, I'm doing my own thing is the norm. It's the environment they've grown up in. And so that has influenced them to act so coldly, I guess you would say, because it's like my group, my family, my environment is what matters. And that's actually a very big thing because in at least Asia, it's like, oh my God, family is everything. Family will always be everything. And it's like, I want this to work out. So I have money for my family. I have money for these connections. I have money for all these things. So that's just the environment they've grown up in. Like if we're following like specific Asian practices, it's like, okay, respect your elders, always take blessings from them, take everything from them because, it's just that environment. And so it's like, because your elders have sacrificed for you. So I think it literally is just that environment of very competitive and sacrifice everything and everyone just so that your family has that opportunity. And it's varying degrees of like intensity. Like you can just have like, okay, I'm gonna do the best I personally can without exploiting anyone, hopefully, to get to where I want to be. And then there's other places of I don't care who I exploit as long as I get the benefit. And it's just like levels of ambition and levels of like how crazy were you raised crazy in
Yeah.
quotation marks.
It's kind of like the same, like, overarching thing, but just, like, you see a lot of nuance with it. Is that, like, the kind of, like, the summation of what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, like, what else because now I'm, like, heavily, like, thinking about, like, Japan's work culture because I've heard so much about that. There's something I heard with, like, um oh my god, there was something specifically I heard about, like oh, I think it's that they're giving, like, couples or, like, women, like, time off because they have such, like, intense work culture that their birth rates are getting lower. I think it's either Japan or China, but I swear I heard that specifically about Japan, but I also know that there's also just, like, a really harsh, like, difference between, like, the male population and female population in China, and that's why, like, what is it? They're hoping to like have more women in China just because like they prioritize having boys for so long that like the population is like not evenly distributed. But yeah, mostly like fixated on Japan. I think that's have you heard anything about that? Because I swear I heard something about that like earlier in the
Yeah,
year.
I actually have, yeah.
Uh,
I know South Korea at the very least, their birth rates are declining. China's is kind of doing their own thing. Japan,
yeah.
I know they're also in the decline. My dad and I were actually talking about that, and we were like, "Yeah, it's in a decline now." And we found that really interesting because it's like these countries who are at the very least a little bit more conservative leaning in like their family values and their societal values are like not having children and are not continuing this. And that really just puts a perspective on what they're doing to our generation. What are they doing to our generation that's really just being like, "Eh, I don't want kids. I don't want any of this stuff. I hate everything." And it's just like that environment has become so toxic. Like before, it was something, but now it's just become so like encroaching to the point where birth rates are declining in a lot of different Asian places, and it's just a whole mess. It's a wreck and a half.
Is it just largely I feel like, at least from my understanding of it, it seems it happens largely because of, like, the intensity of the work culture. Like, people are so fixated on getting ahead in terms of so fixated on getting ahead professionally that they're not really thinking about their personal life, which is so sad when you think about it in the grand scheme of things because it's like, where's the balance? You know what I'm saying? It's like you as an individual deserve time to allocate to, like, your habits or not your habits, your hobbies and like having free time or just being able to relax. And it's kind of sad because it's like, of course, you shouldn't have to have kids. Like I'm not trying to make it come across in that
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But what I'm trying to get at is that, like, if you like, people should have the room to have a family if that's what is that they desire. Like, ultimately, you should have room to, like, have free time or indulge even in, like, yourself and, like, your own hobbies if that's what you want. But people should also have my point is, like, people should have a life outside of work. That's ultimately the basis of what I'm trying to get at. And, what is it? I feel like you don't really see that, like, specifically in, like, Japanese culture just because they're so fixated on getting ahead professionally, and that's just what the culture is. Like, that's literally what they're used to. And it's so sad because I think about it and I'm just like, what if there's a person who's like, "Guys, like, can I just have weekends off, please?" And they're like, "You're lazy." You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes. Oh my
that's, like,
gosh. And
what the culture is, and I wonder if it's like that.
me too, honestly. But I think another thing that you and we were actually talking about this before we like actually started the podcast, but I was asking Emily, like, "Hey, Emily, I'm only taking like a few things, but I feel so overwhelmed with like, my schedule." And I'm like kind of like, "Gosh, dang it, how do I balance a work and life?" And then Emily was also sharing her personal issues with, living on her own and whatnot. And it's just like we struggle with it to an extent. But like imagine how much they're struggling with it. And it's just like that's incredible. That is insane. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, actually, because when I put it in perspective, I'm like, dang, like if I get overwhelmed sometimes, like, how are they feeling? And that's supposed to be their norm. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, that's incredibly insane. Like I can't fathom that. That's oh my gosh. That feels dystopian in a sense. It's like you're a human and you're working like a machine. How are you not burnt out? And I feel like they are burnt out. I mean, the suicide
oh,
rates don't lie, but it's like, oh my God, is this really a culture? How did this happen? That's my first question. It's like, how did a culture like this even stem to like sustain itself for this long? How is it not already collapsed yet? If that's what I'm kind of
sounds like it's definitely on the brink of collapse. Because when you're considering the high rate of suicide and then also the decline in birth rates, I feel like now I'm like, wait, now I'm like trying to rationalize it in my head. I'm like, okay, maybe like at least the civilians. I mean, I wouldn't know just because I've never been to Japan specifically, or I don't like I've never experienced like day-to-day life over there in a way where like I would actually be able to understand or empathize. But like now it's like making me wonder, like, do the people who like work in Japan, like, do they recognize the issue like with like work culture over there? And they just like feel like the way that they're working is the only way that they can sustain themselves and survive or get ahead or actually like, make a decent income? Or is it more so that they're so locked in that it's like, well, this is just normal. And then there are like those people who are like, well, I can't take this anymore. And just like, or like, yeah, now I'm just like wondering, I'm like, what is like the mindset of like an average individual who works like white collar in Japan? Like now I wonder like what the average like mindset is. And of course it varies per individual, but I'm just like, what is the general consensus of how they feel about that work culture? Like now I'm like, do they feel like they're locked in and this is just what's normal for them? Or is it kind of like they're aware of the problem, but this is literally the only way that they can survive while, like, working in Japan. Like, now I'm, like, wondering.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's, like, kind of a mix between it. I feel like it's just something that I feel like they're like, I want that." Like, "I wanna work towards that goal." It's like the peer pressure, I guess, and it's like they want it, but they don't want it individually. It's like, for example, if you and your friend are, like, always, like, having grades and it's like they had a 98 and you have, like, a 92. It's like you want that 98 too because you have that peer pressure. I feel like it's that peer pressure. Like, there's a lot of people in, like, these countries that I've, like, personally met, like, a lot of people in India, they're just like, "I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna go through the grinder. I don't wanna go through this whole thing, but I have to. I have to go through these exams. I have to do all these things because this is how I'm supposed to survive. There is no future for me unless I do these things. There's no acceptance for me societally unless I do these things." So it's like the peer pressure that indoctrinates them to
Mm,
want these things. And it's like they originally probably didn't want it, but it's the environment thing, as you said, Emily, that kind of just forces them to be like, I want it, I want it. Because that's the only way they can survive. If they constantly feel like there's like a hands around their throat and forcing them to do something, they would have lost it already. So I feel like it's like a defense mechanism to be like, I want this. I genuinely want to, perform to these levels and whatnot. But in reality, it's more of like, I'm only saying I want this to survive.
yeah. No, I feel like that sounds pretty accurate. I mean, like, I wouldn't know just because, like, let me reiterate, I would not know just because 'cause I've never experienced this firsthand, nor, like, have I ever had any semblance of, like, like, what Japanese or, like, Asian, like, work culture is like. But aside from, like, what I've heard, like, what is it, through, like, news outlets or videos or anything like that. But, yeah, I feel like, honestly, that sounds like a pretty, like, accurate rationalization. So those things where it's like, you're in a system and it's like in order to survive in the system, you have to function within its parameters. Because if you deviate from it, then you can't thrive in it. Like, even if you don't want to, it's like you have to operate within that system as much as you don't want to because that's the only way that, like, guarantees survival, I feel. Yeah, and then, like, it kind of reminds me of, I'm not sure if you've heard of Black Mirror. It's, like, super popular. Have you seen that, like, on Netflix or no?
I have. I've heard of it
Mm.
actually. I know
Yeah,
you're talking about.
it reminds me of this one episode. It's my favorite episode on Black Mirror. It's called no, it's called Hang the DJ, I think. It's called Hang the DJ.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's this, like, simulation, right? And this, like, sort of relates to, like, what I'm saying. I'm gonna give, like, a quick little synopsis on it. But
Yeah.
essentially, the episode is that, like, couples will go into the simulation, not couples, but, like, singles will go into the simulation, and they're supposed to, like, find your perfect pair, like, down to, like, a 99.8% accuracy, like, you're
Oh my
truly,
gosh.
like, killing
Wow.
it, right? And essentially, like, the episode focuses on these, like, 2 people. It's, like, this one lady and this one guy, and essentially, like, the system pairs you with, like, a person, like, for a certain amount of time, and then from that, like, based off the results of that relationship, it recalibrates and, like, gives you your next match up until, like, you find your, like, perfect match. And then on pairing day, you go and, like, you find your match, right?
Yeah.
Basically, like, the guy and the girl, like, they got their pairing and, like, it wasn't like each other, and they really wanted to be with each other, right?
Oh,
So,
dang.
like, they ran away from the simulation because there's, like, a ladder that, like, lets you escape it, and, basically, like, they didn't realize this, but the way the simulation works is that, there's 1,000 trials of the simulation, and if a couple decides to be together and they run away from the simulation, 99 out of what is it? 900, like, 99 out of the 1,000, like, trials that there are, then they're, like, the true match for each other, because they so desperately wanted to be together that they ran away literally every single time from the simulation together. So, like, my point is that, like, the way that I'm trying to, like, relate this back is more so that, like, what is it? In order to kind of, like, survive, like, within a certain set of parameters, you kind of have to function within it. But there will always kind of be that minority where, like, people will genuinely, like, wanna escape, but that doesn't necessarily, like, guarantee, like, survival or, like, success in the same way, what is it? Actually, like, functioning and trying to, like, work your way up within those, like, parameters that are set for you would. Like,
Yeah.
that's actually what I'm trying to get at. Like, that was, like,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely
yeah,
long-winded, but
yeah. That's actually a very good analysis. My English teacher would love that. But no, I definitely agree because it's like one size doesn't always fit all. And it's just like you can't have, a simulation and expect everyone to work with it. And it's just like sometimes the best success that you could possibly have is the success that's self-made, the success that you genuinely feel so strongly about. And I guess that's just like, I guess it's just like what we don't really have in the moment. And I feel like tying this all back to, overconsumption and whatnot, it really is just the why is like people want all of these micro trends. People all want all of these like different clothing pieces and whatnot. Like you're oh my god, oh my gosh, they made like the little dupes of the big red boots and all of that. I don't even know.
Wait, which big red boots? Like the
Remember the
Clipper
big red boots? Like
the
the
Clipper
huge ones?
boots?
Yeah.
Wait, I think it's like the Clipper boots. There's like a freaking like TV show or something like that. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like there's
Yeah.
do you know what show it is? I'm trying to remember. I swear it's like Caillou or like
Oh my god, it is Caillou.
is it Caillou?
I think
Oh,
it's Caillou. I don't know though. I think it's Caillou, but
those
like
red boots are so funny, but I think like they're like Balenciaga or like Yeezy or something, no?
yeah, and they're
Yeah.
just like, "Why?" And then I remember, like, everyone was like, oh my god, the Yeezys thing, no! Oh my gosh, all the boys at my school, they all had Yeezys, and they still have Yeezys, and it's just like, why? They're like some over glorified slippers. No hate to Yeezys, but, like, at the same time, I'm hating on you a little bit because 'cause you're over glorified slippers, like, there's nothing awesome about you. You're kinda just like, you know and that's actually a thing. A lot of these luxury brands, to, like, bring that up, as in, like, okay, why are the like, people Shein and luxury brands are both targeted, like they're both very different, but they're both targeted towards the middle class
Mm,
because it gives people in the middle class like oh my god, I could shop like I'm a billionaire. Like, have you seen those Temu ads? It's like shop like you're a millionaire. It's like that's what Shein wants. They want to shop like you're a millionaire. You have a bunch of clothes. But Gucci, they also are like, okay, we have prices, but like we only have brands so that you can wear it and feel rich. So it's
yeah.
specifically towards the middle class that like gets all of this stuff
It's
and
like a
it's just
status
like
symbol.
yeah and it's just like oh my gosh, like and the thing is rich people they don't really do that. They dress like very sleek, they dress very modest in the sense of like they don't have a bunch of logos everywhere, but the logos are literally just for the middle class to be like look at my clothing, look how amazing it is. It's just those two sides or like those two extremes are just
Mhm.
so I don't even know.
We have a few minutes left, but I'm just gonna like give a few closing thoughts on like what is it like what you said. But yeah, I feel like I completely agree with what you're saying. Both like what is it, high end brands and also like brands like Sheen and like Timu and like Rame, they're targeted specifically towards the middle class, where it's like with Sheen and like fast fashion, like for them, it's more so shop like you're a millionaire, feel like you have a lot of money because because you can buy so many clothes. Whereas with, like, higher end brands like Gucci and, like, Louis Vuitton, it's more so like the status symbol. Like, you can absolutely just, like, what is it? Drench yourself, like, head to toe in that designer logo and, like, have people look at you and assume that you have money, but in reality, it's like people who are truly, truly wealthy, they buy from brands that are very, very, like, oh my god, this is so, like, very demure, like, me, like, using but you know what I'm getting at, just very
Yeah.
yeah, just very, like, low key where it's, like, more so esoteric in the way where it's, like, somebody of their status would be able to recognize that brand or that logo, but not somebody from, like, any other class would. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, there's this one specific brand, I forgot what it was, where it's, like, their clothing costs thousands, thousands of dollars, but their, like, material and the logos that they use are very distinct and would only ever be discerned from somebody who's very familiarized with, like, that type of fashion that typically is people who are wealthy. So it's like, for them, it's more so just about being, like, very, like, sleek and clean and just not drawing attention. Whereas, like, with, like, the middle class, sometimes, like, what is it? Buying designer items means more so, like, being a little bit more flamboyant in that way or, like, ostentatious even. But yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, you see the distinction and it's like, yeah, that's essentially what I'm trying to get at is that like with like people who are truly, truly wealthy, like have like our old money, it's like they're more like low key, I guess, for lack of better words, when it comes to what is it, their wealth. Like they're not necessarily looking to prove a point. That's essentially like the foundation of what I'm trying to get at. Like for them, it's like they know what is it, like that they're financially stable and they don't have to prove it to anybody. Whereas like I feel like sometimes like people of like the working class, like especially with, like, social media and just wanting to kind of, like, exemplify yourself or make yourself, like, seem like, like, bigger than you are in a way, like, that's where that specific group, like, gets caught up in either, like, trying to make themselves, like yeah, I feel like it's ultimately kind of like the same it's kind of like the different side of the same coin, I feel ultimately. It's, like, either making yourself look like oh, what is it? Like, you have a lot of money by buying, like, designer things, even if you can literally, like, even if, like, you give, like, half of your savings to, like, one designer item, or it's, like, shopping on Shein where it's, like, you have so many different clothes, it looks like, like, "Oh my god, she has so much, like he or she has, like, so much, like, clothes," like, obviously, like, they can afford it. You know what I'm saying? I feel like it's
Yeah,
ultimately, like, the same side of it's just the same point, just different sides.
definitely. So like I guess to close off, this is really just us, I guess it's just like, overconsumption. It's a huge problem. And a lot of these different companies are getting on that bandwagon. They're like, all right, let's do it. Let's go and give people the things they want. And it's working because that's what people want. So they're getting onto these micro trends that are mostly contributed by social media and whatnot. And they're producing thousands upon thousands of clothings every single day. And that's just incredible. And they're using really sketchy sources to, get the materials for their clothing, as well as, people who create the clothing using refugees and people who are just in deep, deep poverty. And it's just terrible for the people, terrible for the environment. And a lot of this really is just contributed by the work culture and environment that really just happens, in Asia. But it's also really, us in America and whatnot, or in places where we're more well off, being like, well, what can we do? What can we really do to stop it? And so that's the lack of action that really occurs. Um, is there anything you want to add, Emily?
I guess on a final, I just want to say, yeah, like overconsumption is definitely, I feel like, one of the bigger issues that our generation is facing, and we'll definitely see the consequences of it a lot later down the line, or well, not even later down the line, probably sooner than later, considering
Yeah.
crisis that we're having with our environment. But on a final note, I just want to say I hope you guys enjoyed this episode.
Yeah.
Definitely getting a little bit more lighthearted now, but I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we definitely have a lot more ideas to, like, come, and yeah, I think that is everything I wanna say on a closing note. I look forward to seeing you guys next month.
Yeah. Thank you so much for letting me be on the podcast. We'll see
Yeah.
you guys. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com and DeltaForce.net.